This review of Star Trek Picard Episode 4 Absolute Candor contains full spoilers. The link to the playlist with my reviews of other episodes is in the description as well if you haven't seen those and would like to. As per the ongoing trend, Absolute Candor opens with another flashback, this time to what it calls a Romulan Relocation hub on a deserty planet. Indeed, the show's attempt to force present day parallels is kicked into overdrive here, as the Romulans shown are far more racially diverse than ever before. The whole location has an overt Middle Eastern feel to it, and to cap it all off, the soundtrack plays music style to match. It's about as subtle as Carry On Up the Khyber, and about as contrary to the Romulans that we've seen in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine as it gets, in case there was any doubt left that Star Trek Picard is a project happy to contort Star Trek history and continuity to force a political message. I think it's this, along with cost saving, that probably explains the other baffling choice throughout the show, to have clothing and things in general look a lot more like present day Earth than like the Star Trek that we've seen before, and this is capped off here by Picard beaming down to this planet in a beige linen suit and a sun hat. It wouldn't shock me if by the end of the series the head of this new and villainous Federation is revealed to be an orange-skinned alien named President Bad. Anyway, there's a couple more examples of Star Trek Picard's habit of cherry-picking broad things from The Next Generation here. He briefly does a bit of fencing, which he did a few times in that show, but also Picard's dislike of children is referenced, and obviously no longer present. This was presented at the outset of The Next Generation, as Picard wasn't altogether comfortable with commanding a ship that had kids on it, but mainly came up as awkwardness with Wesley Crusher. Though to be fair, who could like Wesley? It also had some payoff in the episode Disaster, where Picard is trapped in a turbolift with 3 children and gets them through it. Picard gives a young Romulan child a copy of the Three Musketeers, because of course Picard is French, and you only need to have seen the trailers to know that child is going to grow up into that Romulan Legolas character when the show returns to its present day. Also, there's Romulan nuns. We'll come to learn that the nuns are the worst enemies of the Tal Shiar, and it's implied they're also excellent trained fighters, though we never see it, and frankly it's very hard to picture that from looking at them. There is though a genuine sense of warmth that comes across between Picard and the Romulan lad, and there is legitimacy in this from Picard's prior arc. In Star Trek Generations, Picard breaks down about the death of his brother and nephew, and not just because of the immediate loss, but also because it marks the end of his family line. Like Kirk before him, Picard clearly has some regret at making his career in Starfleet at the expense of starting a family of his own, and this is revealed more fully in his Nexus experience, when his personal paradise is shown to be living in an idealised Victorian house with a wife and several children, as well as his nephew Rene. It also seems he justified it to himself by comforting himself with the knowledge that his brother's family had ensured the continuation of the Picards. Perhaps the disdain for children shown in earlier Picard at the start of The Next Generation can be interpreted as a psychological wall that he's put up after the fact, knowing his career path makes it unlikely he'll ever have a family, a form of sour grapes. After this, the title sequence promised a guest appearance by Jeri Ryan, and we also see that this one is directed by Jonathan Frakes. Fantastic news. I've not mentioned the titles before, but they're very stylish yet subdued. They're not really very much like Star Trek, but then the same goes for the show in general. They are though an artistic triumph at least. The show's present day gets underway with Dr. Jurati complaining that space is boring. That doesn't bode well, the programme's hardly been at a breakneck pace before this. The hope was that Picard finally jetting off into space would mark the beginning of stuff really happening. As Picard's diverted them from the course to Freecloud to first visit Vashti, the planet in the teaser, it's not looking promising on the things happening front. Similarly, Picard is on a holodeck simulation of his chateau, just in case we were homesick from finally being away from it. I suppose having built the sets, they want their money's worth. Picard pauses the program and the birds outside stop flying, but I notice the fire keeps going in the fireplace. The banter between the new crew is okay. Dr. Jurati occasionally lapses into something like the deconstructionist Buffy speak that plagues so much of modern film and television, but she's also earnest enough that it doesn't grate as much as it might otherwise. Raffi is still by far the best new character, not necessarily even so much because of her lines, but she's excellently portrayed by Michelle Hurd. With the possible exception of his Romulan housekeeper Laris, Raffi is the only new character in this show who comes anywhere near to Picard himself in terms of quality. The conversation's quite good too in terms of world building. It's only brief, but it tells us a lot about Vashti, its region of space, the piracy, the rangers who should be in control of the area but are overwhelmed. It's a slight thing, but it does a lot to make the whole thing feel real, and it's very welcome considering how confined the show has felt before now. Picard wants to go to Vashti in the hope that one of the Romulan nuns will opt to join him. Again, having seen the trailers makes it no mystery at all who ends up coming along. These Romulan nuns are, unfortunately, called the Kawat Malat. I'd finally got used to saying Jat Vash, and now these shows sprung another dreadful sci-fi name on us. The issue with Elnor, the boy from the teaser, is that the fact that he's Romulan Legolas feels so obvious that it almost puts you off saying it, and considering his name, I think that's exactly what they've tried to convey. My Middle-earth knowledge isn't anywhere near my Star Trek knowledge, but Elnor is the most elvish sounding name possible, and I'm not sure you could come up with better. Indeed, when Picard beams down to the settlement on Vashti, while the area is still run down and dusty, the shots emphasise more the surrounding plant life, including a great big tree, which kind of evokes Rivendell or Lothlorien, or one of those, or maybe the planet from Avatar, but then it is only one shot of a big tree. Anyway, taken together with Raffi's issues in the previous episode, the theme is established that Picard is a bit of a git for abandoning people. After they got on so well and he got attached to Picard in the teaser, Elnor is clearly aggrieved that Picard never came back to see him again. Saddest for Elnor though is that he's never seen a cat. Can such a life be worth living? Over on the artifact, as we've become accustomed to, the boring stuff happens. Narek shows Soji a pretend Borg ritual, even though the Borg of course didn't have rituals, and really it's just that there's a corridor that you can slide along in your socks, and then they go all giggly and silly before kissing and being all romantic, even though they actually already did the dirty deed 2 episodes ago. Now I think of it, every set we've ever seen there has looked like a laser quest. Narek turns interrogator after that because Soji is mysterious, but it advances things so little. It's like the snail's pace of plot progression on the Borg ship is there to make us feel like things are quicker than they are elsewhere. Later we learn from Narek talking with his sister that his mission is to find out where Soji came from and how many more like her there are. She gives him 1 more week to accomplish this, at least putting a limit on how much more of these boring antics we'll have to endure. Anyway, because the plot needs him to be a bit of an idiot, Picard walks up to a Romulan cafe hangout, throws its Romulans only sign on the ground, and walks in and sits down as everyone watches him in silence. Dr. Benayoun was right, clearly Picard's parietal lobe defect really is making him do crazy things. This gets Picard into a sword fight, which Elnor comes and rescues him from by cutting the guy's head clean off. It's very handy that the other Rommies tried to make it a sword fight, as Elnor almost discovers a sword's no match for a gun. At least he's not got a space bow and arrow for too obvious an analogue with Legolas, but I hope we're not going to see more situations that are this contrived just for him to be able to use his sword in a galaxy where most if not all baddies will have a phaser. Things conclude on a space battle situation where it's not entirely clear to me why they don't just fly off. Rios says they can't outrun the warbird but can outfly them, but I'm not sure why they'd be chased anyway, and at least if they were, they wouldn't also have the planetary defence to contend with. The whole thing's more Star Wars than Star Trek. It's nice to see an old-timey Romulan warbird in action at least though. Rios unleashes another of his emergency holograms, this time a lackadaisical tactical one to operate the weapons, who for some reason only speaks Spanish. In fact, the more you think about that, the stupider it is. It should be worse than I found it really, but anything's better than last week's Irish one. There's a nice moment where Picard instinctively starts giving orders before shrinking back for a moment, realising Rios is in fact the one in command, and then they beam the pilot off another ship who got involved and was about to crash, and it's 7 of 9. I'd forgotten by this point that Jeri Ryan was listed in the titles, so that was a nice surprise. Unfortunately, then the episode ended. Absolute Candor is an improvement on the 2 previous episodes for what it's worth, though it does share their issues in that the actual development is minimal. In this case it can feel like more's happened than actually has, just because at least we're in some new locations with the ship and Vashti. Really it just serves to add Elnor to the crew, and while he's not nearly as objectionable as Romulan Legolas seemed conceptually from the trailer, he doesn't seem worth a whole episode just to get on the ship. Star Trek Picard so far though has always been jammed tomorrow. It promises more to come, and then when you excitedly tune in for the next one you get very little. Now 7 of 9's aboard and this detour's over, and Narek's sister has promised she'll only put up with his dancing around Soji for 1 more week. Things more than ever surely feel like we'll really get started with something now. So next week 7 of 9 will probably stay fainted for the entire episode while Picard and Elnor search for a ginger cat to add to the crew. On a personal and trifling note, that title bothers me a little as well, spelling Candor without the U. I know Star Trek is foremost an American show for Americans, but the main actor being English makes me feel a little jealous over the language, and from this side of the pond at least, the Websterian bastardised version of the English used in the title feels incongruous considering the lead character. Picard himself is a Frenchman of course, though considering the amount of English affectation Picard has in addition to his accent and the obscurity of the French language by this point of time, as referenced by Data in the Next Generation episode Code of Honor, one could suspect there's been an overriding cultural English imperialism spread into France by the 24th century. It's only what the Normans did to us, I suppose. Absolute Candor isn't the first episode of Star Trek to have the American spelling, of course. There's been a few episodes with honour in the title, including the legendary and more controversial by the year Code of Honor referenced already. Deep Space Nine had Civil Defense and Favour the Bold. Enterprise had Civilization, and the biggest example is probably the Voyager episode Manoeuvres, being only a single word but having 2 differences compared with the UK English spelling. I mention this here because, well, try as I might, Absolute Candor hasn't offered all that much to discuss. At this rate, the best we can hope for next week is a reference to the fish Picard had in his ready room. I'm sure I could get 5 minutes out of that. Thank you for listening. Do please like and share if you've enjoyed it, and leave me a comment with any thoughts. And if you feel I deserve it and would like to hear from me again, I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe as well. The links to various social media are in the description below, including the invite link to the Headhunters Media Discord server. So if you'd like to pop by for a chat about Star Trek or anything else, it would be great to see you. This is Jonathan from Headhunters Media, and I hope I'll catch you again soon.